Hey there, everyone. It's like 6:23 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It is January, February, March, April 20th, 2024. It's a cold morning here in Michigan because it's April and the weather doesn't know what to do with itself. So running the furnace. I don't know if that's going to be loud or if this new software I'm using is going to be able to filter that out real well or not. Hopefully the answer is yes. So we'll call this a briefs. Why not? Because one title is as good as the next. But what I'm going to do here, I haven't made a briefs in a while. Just because I'm kind of busy working and dealing with the state. Because you know how the state is in their benevolence and infinite wisdom. They love to criminalize the common slave class working man via contracts. That's correct. All those neato contracts in the American Constitution that so many people out there love to say, we should go back to the Constitution because, the Constitution is one of the best documents ever. That Constitution that gives everyone the right to freely contract. Yeah, including with the state. And then when they decide that, that contract's been broken or you want to dissolve it, then they make judgments which compel you to perform. Otherwise, they criminalize you. That's correct. They like to throw you in jail and do other fun stuff like that. So you got to work even harder. Spend more of your time at your slave job. So that's kind of what I've been up to. But I'm still maintaining the Patreon, the Obry Project Patreon, in which I release an audio every week. It's like every other week right now. We're doing the Rise and Fall of the Great Powers by Dr. something, Paul Kennedy. That's it. And then on the off weeks, we're doing Let's Consider the Book of Matthew. So 2 audio series. They get released every week on Friday. And then, basically, intermittently, I'm doing video just so that the images are on screen of finding the Bible, in which I'm doing, I guess if I call them deep dive word studies, that might be an understatement. We're still at Genesis 1, and we're about 10 episodes in. I'm not kidding. And it's for a really good set of reasons. And, so if you sign up at the Patreon for a $25 tier, you would get all of those audios and the Finding the Bible videos when I can release them. So sometimes I can release one a week. Sometimes I have to put a heck of a lot more work into one. It might be 2 weeks. It's kind of the way it goes. At $35 membership, you can also get the various articles that I produce, which includes chapters from the book that I and Hannah have been translating, the falsification of the history of early Christianity from Wilhelm Kempmeyer, circa 1950s. That's when it was, I believe that's when all of the various parts and notes that made up that book were sort of put together and edited. Or Hannah's articles. One of these series of articles is it's basically a critique of a book by Josh McDowell, and then the other series of articles is a critique of a book by James White. The one by James White is the KJV only controversy, and the McDowell one is evidence demanding a verdict. So there's a lot of good stuff you can get over there. That's one of the best ways you can help me to continue doing what I do. So here we got this thing. Now, for a while, I have been looking at this whole idea of the history of shipping on the Great Lakes. Because, well, according to their story, there has been travel and shipping by the white Europeans on the Great Lakes from, I guess the earliest they would say that there was shipping and navigation via birch bark canoes, maybe the late 1600s or the 1700s, mostly for furs. That's correct. Mostly French and mostly for furs. Furs. They needed those furs. Yes, they explored much of the interior of the American continent for some fur. F-U-R, fur. Anyways, the way this works out. So they say, well, you know, over the centuries, there has been an amazing amount of shipwrecks to happen, all the way up to about 1975. And anybody who's somewhat familiar with Great Lakes shipping would know that the last real shipwreck to happen on the Great Lakes happened in about 1975. I keep saying about because I don't have the thing in front of me. The wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. You know the Gordon Lightfoot song where he got everything kind of a little bit wrong? That's the one. And then they say there's really been no shipwrecks since. So that's 75, 85, 95, 2005, 2015. That's almost 50 years. No shipwreck. And what's weird about that, John? What's weird about that is if you ask any of these Great Lakes shipping experts, they would tell you up to that point in time, from the time men's been sailing on the lakes, which they say would have been in sailing ships of all sorts. And that's a whole problem in and of itself. Having the wind power to sail up and sail down on the Great Lakes and sailing ships. They say that there has been so many shipwrecks, it equals out to about, brace yourself, about 20 a year. About the average over the course of Great Lakes shipping. About what? 300 years, like 3 centuries. So many shipwrecks that it would have to be about 20 a year. What do I mean? I mean, they say there's about 6,000. I'm not kidding. Look this up for yourself. About 6,000. That'd be about 20 a year. And the reason that that's crazy, little nuts, is it involves a lot of implications. I mean, a whole heck of a lot of implications. And not only implications, but really outlandish, nutty claims about how and why these shipwrecks happen. And if you want to read some good comedy, just get you some books on Great Lakes shipwrecks. One of the best for comedy would be the book that Neil Zoss produced. It's supposed to be sort of like the whaleback Bible. For those who aren't familiar with whalebacks, they're a type of ship said to have been built in the 1880s and 90s, mostly up in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Twin Harbors. They say designed by a guy named Alexander McDougall. I'm not sure if I can get this to load fast or not. But essentially, they looked like a submarine. If you look at the hull and the design and where the turrets are placed on it, see if I get this image up, maybe fast or maybe not fast. These are pretty high quality, high res images at the site that I'm at. Maybe. But anyways, so they say 44 of those were produced in about 12 years. They say there was a huge amount of variations to them all, by the way, in those 12 years. So they had time for R&D during those 12 years that they built 44. That's, I mean, come on, that's almost 4 year. Time for R&D and all kinds of variations built into these things. And wouldn't you know it, every single one of them wrecked. Darn it. Under some of the craziest circumstances you've ever heard. And there's the problem. When I start reading these stories about Great Lakes shipwrecks, the red flags, they just don't stop going off. So what I decided to do to give you a good idea of the kind of insanity that I suppose we're expected to believe about Great Lakes shipwrecks over the years, up until 1975, when everything went quiet. It was now safe to travel the lakes again in 1975, for the last 50 years now. Average of 20 shipwrecks a year. You have no, that'd be like beyond the most dangerous job. Hey, you want to be a Great Lakes sailor? Well, no, I kind of like being alive, so I think I'll just go to work at the McDonald's. We do have to believe that a lot of these guys just put their lives at remarkable risk, really not for huge paydays. No, which is really hard to believe, because everybody I know who is alive, they like being alive. They're pretty happy about being alive, and they don't really want to be not alive in general, just as a rule of thumb. So we have to believe that a lot of them, they didn't care about being alive or not. They were in love with Lady Lake. And they went out there and they sailed and died and stuff, just so that somebody like Gordon Lightfoot could write a song about them and get everything wrong. So, like I said, this particular story is as good as any. This is actually out of a book. It's not a big book, Great Lakes Shipwrecks. And it was produced by the Great Lakes Gazette a number of decades ago, I believe. I have this on PDF because I had to make a PDF of the book. I got it from the library, made a PDF out of it, like most of the other books that are printed about Great Lakes shipping and shipwrecks. There's not a whole lot of digital copies of them. Like the book I mentioned by Zoss. I have it in print, in paperback. I can't even get a Kindle. They don't offer in Kindle. They're so interested in this information being disseminated that they decided, no, we don't want it in Kindle. Just paperback. Thank you very much. I couldn't find it in PDF either. So this one I made myself just by, of course, scanning the book using my Acrobat DC, making a digital copy. So here's one article, and they keep it pretty short. Most authors that write about Great Lakes shipwrecks, I mean, they keep story to story short, which you'd want to, because the more detail you add, the more crazy sounding it is. Got to keep it short and sweet. So this particular article is called The Heartbreaking Half Mile. And it's about a steamer called the LC Waldo. And remember, the devil's always in the details. So this is a good example. So it says The Heartbreaking Half Mile. And they start, the big storm of November 8, 9, and 10, 1913 has long been discussed in the annals of the Great Lakes. However, if you look into Great Lakes shipwrecks in general, you'll find out that there was said to be a ton of other wrecks all around this time. Turn of the century, and maybe the first 20 years of the 20th century, the time I like to call it a fuzzy years. Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of shipwrecks. Anyways, there was supposed to be a huge kind of winter storm, or many winter storms in 1913 that took many ships. So it says, taking 250 lives and 11 ships, the big storm sprang upon the lakes with unprecedented fury, catching many mariners on the water, hurrying to make one last trip of the season. So that's the first part you're going to find with all of these stories, is this recklessness. Recklessness of captains, recklessness of the ship owners, recklessness of the crew, total recklessness. And when you consider how much there is to be lost, besides lives, that's a big one, lives. When you consider the fact that a lot of these ships are talking about that wrecked full of tons, many tons of iron ore and coal or grain, products, lumber, you would think that more ship owners and those captains, the captains, of course, their job is to keep the ship safe and to protect the lives of the crew. They've got kind of a twofold responsibility. They need to protect the lives of their crew, because the crew is not going to be very apt to listen to or respect their captain if he doesn't care about their well-being. Promise. I promise. But secondly, they have a responsibility to the ship owners to make them money. And this is true. So they need to keep sailing whenever they can keep sailing. But they also need to keep the ship above water. That's important. Ship owners like when you keep the ships above water, not on the bottom of the lake. So the idea that so many of these captains decided to sail out in ridiculous weather over and over again and over and over again and over and over again for centuries, but especially 1800s to, we're going to say, up to 1975. It's beyond ridiculous. It's just beyond ridiculous. And they give us excuses like, you know, those shipping companies, they were real hard cases, and they put a lot of pressure on those captains to keep that stuff rolling. Keep sailing, keep sailing. Which doesn't make a lot of sense when you consider that if they pressure the captain too much to keep sailing through inclement weather, you can look back a little ways and see, oh, well, you know, there is an average of 20 shipwrecks per year on the Great Lakes. So I figure when we get kind of bad weather coming in, or signs of bad weather coming in, and even back then, people say, well, we didn't have advanced meteorology like we do today. We had almanacs. And people had eyes and ears, and they could tell when a storm is coming in. Now, some storms just come in kind of out of nowhere sometimes, seems like. But one thing I remember as a kid, all we had was the Farmer's Almanac. And the crazy thing was, it was pretty darn good with the weather. When's it going to be a hot summer? When's it going to be a rainy spring? So you could say, well, you know, some of those ships, they just got caught in a fluke storm. But the thing is about that is a lot of them, according to these stories, they sail out in this terrible weather. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Not if you want to make money and keep your ships above water. Here at the Great Lakes Shipping Company, etc., we like to keep our ships above water. We pride ourselves in keeping our ships well above water. Thank you very much. So they say only a fortunate few who knew the signs of the approaching bad weather had prudently remained in port. So there were signs. There were signs of bad weather. And only a fortunate few who had a brain cell or two decided to stay in the safety of the harbor when the storm came in. And if any of you don't understand the horror of Great Lakes storms on the lakes, you might not really have an idea of what we're looking at as far as what these men would be facing if this captain decided to sail out in bad weather. And there we get back to, do the crew trust him? You know, because, hey, look, You can say anything you want to about, well, it's the company, and if those sailors wanted a job, then they just do what they're told. That doesn't quite work when it comes down to reality. Reality. You're a Great Lakes sailor, and you've seen some stuff. If you're a Great Lakes sailor, you've been on the lakes for a few years even. You've seen some stuff. You know how treacherous the lakes are, how treacherously cold and horrible that Lake Superior can be, especially its northern shore, how bad the waves can be along there. Not just the north, the south too. How treacherous Lake Michigan is, the most treacherous lake there is. The winds come straight up from the south to southwest, right up the lake. Terrible weather. Horrible weather. Dangerous stuff. You know how dangerous it is. And then you know, well, our captain has decided, since the company wants to make some money there, he's going to sail us out of the safety of this port into what looks like is going to be a horrible, heartbreaking killer storm in November or December. And let me tell you, the temperatures are really, really low in November and December on the Great Lakes. They keep the Soo locks open until it's either late December or it's in January, and they close them down for like 2 or 3 months because it's way too icy even at the Soo locks to keep them open. They close them down, they do maintenance, they open them back up. The temperatures are terrible. I've been to Lake Superior in the summertime. It was the summertime, and I waded into Lake Superior in the summer. And I thought, good God, this water's cold in the summer. So they go on. One of the ships going about her work was the steamer L.C. Waldo. She was downbound on Lake Superior the morning of November 8th with iron ore for Cleveland, Ohio, under the command of Captain John Duddleson of Sault Ste. Marie. Yes, it's spelled salt, but it's called Sault Ste. Marie, or they just call it the Soo, S-O-O, Michigan. Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. The Waldo had loaded the previous day in 2 harbors, so that would be, I believe, Duluth and Superior, Wisconsin. Sorry, Duluth, Minnesota, Superior, Wisconsin. It's 2 harbors. That's pretty much on the western tip of Lake Superior, a day when storm clouds have been gathering in the west. So when they say downbound, anything that's traveling towards the Soo to go into the St. Mary's River, let out near the Mackinac Strait, and you can either sail down Lake Michigan to go into the Illinois River and to the Mississippi. Well, you'd have to. Most of the time, if it's a freighter, it's going to be unloading its freight, at all the steel mills and industry right along Lake Michigan there at the southern end, Indiana, Port of Indiana, Chicago. Things can be offloaded and put onto barges then, and they can go down the Illinois River to the Mississippi. Or you'd sail into the Huron, fully loaded cargo ships sail right through the Huron down to the, so you got the St. Mary's River and then the St. Clair River, that runs around Detroit, a small lake called the St. Clair Lake, into Erie, so on and so forth. So that's downbound. So anything sailing up into Superior is upbound, just to give you the way that they structure that. So, built in 1896, they say, the Waldo, like many freighters of her day, get this, devil in the details. The Waldo, like many freighters of her day, featured an open or summer pilot house, which provided little protection for the officers on watch. It was this flimsy wooden structure that proved to be her undoing. And let me tell you, this is the thing. You read enough accounts of these Great Lakes shipwrecks, and you will find at least one or more remarkably ridiculous factors. Like no-brainer kind of, are you freaking kidding me factors. And if you saw it, if you saw it once or twice, you'd say, that's crazy. Who was at the wheel? That's stupid. But when you start reading enough of these and you see it every gosh darn time, then you start saying to yourself, hey, wait a minute. Wait a minute. There's something really shady going on here. This is like, this is either something's kind of not right here, or this is a history of stupidity. Unbridled history of stupidity for centuries. It's got to be one or the other. And I don't know about that whole stupidity part. I think it's probably more likely that it's all real fishy, these official stories. So what'd they say? They said this freighter, the Waldo, featured an open pilot house. Open pilot house, which provided little protection for the officers on watch. Open pilot house. So here's kind of the problem. First off, an open pilot house, 1. 2, a flimsy wooden open pilot house. Now, it's problematic on the one hand, and it's unbelievable on the other hand. I'm going to show you why. So, okay, the first big problem with that story about the open pilot house made out of wood. We can see, if we go to a site that has, for instance, Lake Superior Region Weather Statistics. And this isn't just Lake Superior. Guys, I grew up near the southern tip of Lake Michigan. Swam in there quite a bit in the summertime, and it was cold in the summertime. These lakes are cold. They maintain a temperature that's pretty much just above freezing most of the year. Now, the surface water will get a little warmer on some of the lakes than others. And, of course, Erie is nowhere near as deep as the other lakes. They're cold. The water itself is cold. But the air, for instance, like average, this is average high temperatures. So they said they left Duluth that November. What's the average high temperature in Duluth in November? 35 degrees. Geez. Average low temperature, 21 degrees. That's pretty cold. That's pretty cold. And add to it, and I mean, Sault Ste. Marie barely warmer. 26 is the average low in November at the Sault. 39 average high in November at the Sault. That's still cold. That's still super cold. And when you think that the waters of Superior and the other lakes, especially Superior, we'll say especially, because the waters of Superior essentially drain into all the other lakes. They do, I promise. And they know that there's tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of springs all around them. In fact, I have a suspicion that Superior itself is actually fed by a number of immense springs. So anyways, spring water, just to give you kind of an idea, spring water in Michigan, if you visit various springs, and there's all kinds of natural springs all over Michigan, it comes out of the ground just above freezing. So it can be the summertime, and you can take off your socks and shoes and decide to walk in the waters of one of these springs coming out of the ground. And there's areas where just there will be dozens of springs coming right out of the ground, you know, and draining into an area which might make up a lake or something like that, and then it'll find its way into a river and, you know, so on. And you will find your feet are almost frozen. Almost frozen. But all it takes is water that's, you know, couple of degrees above freezing to chill you to the bone. Exposure. Exposure is a big problem. The human body doesn't like that kind of exposure. Exposure can cause sickness and death. We used to know that just as a matter of course once upon a time when we had a few more brains than today. That one of the most dangerous things you can do is exposure. Because it can give you a fever, it can make you sick. What do you mean sick? I thought that was the V word. Exposure. So not only are those mean temperatures on the lakes in Superior pretty darn low in just November, and that's not December, they're lower. Open pilot house? Open pilot house, huh? So not only were you subjecting those guys to average temperatures of like 20 to 30 something degrees, air temperature in an open pilot house, you're also subjecting them to the spray from the waves. Because even if you aren't in a horrible storm, you're still going to get some spray from waves here. You can sail in pretty rough seas in the Great Lakes without worry of, oh, this might take us down. No, I mean, guys, they sail rough seas on the lakes all the time. It's just how rough are those seas and how smart is it to sail on them. But you sail in rough seas, you're going to get that spray from the water. And it's cold. It's cold. Cold, cold, cold. And I don't know if you knew this or not, but it tends to rain and snow on the lakes. A lot. A whole lot. Open pilot house? Bullshit. Bullshit. See, what happens in the pilot house is you typically have the wheel, and so you've got a wheelman that's in the pilot house all the time. All the time. And you also have the captain, and if the captain's off, then you would have probably whoever's his replacement. What do you mean? Don't you mean the first mate? Well, because I'm not exactly sure if they call it that on all Great Lakes ships or not, but it would be his first mate. The guy who would be his second when he has to sleep or he's in his off hours would be in that pilot house. The wheelman controls the wheel. The captain controls the ship. He tells the wheelman what to do, and at least those two guys are going to be in that pilot house. Exposed, apparently, on not just the LC Waldo, but a number of ships they'd want to say had open pilot houses. Bullshit. You better heat that pilot house, or they ain't going to be making good decisions because they're going to be freezing their asses off. Not piloting the ship very well. Freezing their asses off. Open? Okay, so that's the first problem. And not just open. If it was closed, if it was a closed up pilot house, you better have some heat running in there because it's frickin' cold. The lakes are cold. They're cold, man. They're super cold. So, and it's, like I said, it's not just the air, it's all the wetness. It's all the wetness. It's cold and wet. Open pilot house. So what's the other big problem? Well, the other big problem is that they say that it was wood. They built a pilot house out of wood. Flimsy wooden structure on the pilot house. So if you look at this picture right here on the screen, this is a pilot house here. Lakers were traditionally built, of course, with the pilot house up front. Let me see here. I think I might actually have, well, there's another picture of the LC Waldo, but they won't let me blow it up. I don't think they'll let me get like a really big version of it. Pilot house again. Flimsy wood pilot house. I have to go back. So what's weird about that is when you look at the specs for the LC Waldo. The specs say, what's the hull material? Oh, it's steel. The LC Waldo? The hull? Steel. No kidding. So you're telling me that some genius had the idea of making the LC Waldo's hull out of steel 'cause it's strong. But then they thought, you know what would be a good idea on this strong steel-hulled boat? If we put a rickety open wooden pilot house on the steel boat. Let's do that. Let's make the boat really strong, and let's make the place where the people who drive the boat have to be really weak. Let's make it out of wood, and let's make it open. Let's not put no windows or nothing in it or something. So that's the kind of stupidity you have to believe in if you want to believe their stories. So they go on to say the 451 foot Waldo seemed to be weathering the storm well. Although she was taking some water over the sides, there was little undue concern on the bridge. The bridge where everybody was freezing. They didn't think it was the problem because they were so frozen. That's all they could think about was how fucking cold they were. They would soon be coming into the more sheltered waters of Whitefish Bay. So Whitefish Bay is kind of a small bay just before you would get to the Sioux. And it does apparently seem to offer far more shelter. I've been to Whitefish Bay and Whitefish Point. Suddenly, while just to the west of Keweenaw Peninsula, a wave which, by the way, you can see Canada from Whitefish Point. Over the curve of the earth and everything, you can see the trees. So, suddenly, while just to the west of Keweenaw Peninsula, a wave much larger than the rest flung itself upon the ship. It broke over the stern and completely destroyed the poorly constructed wooden pilot house, because the engineers who built it said, well, what are we worried about? Big waves? They will never come over our steel-hulled ship and pummel the wooden pilot house. He said, taking the steering gear, compass, and telegraph with it. Who needs a steel pilot house that's all closed up and warm and dry? Duddleson and first mate Louis Feeger. So the first mate probably would be the guy who would steer when he was off the pilot. So they jumped for their lives down a narrow companionway leader to the Texas deck below. The Texas deck. Yeah? The ship was now at the mercy of the waves with only a Boy Scout type compass braced on a wooden stool and emergency steering gear. I don't know why that would matter. What do you mean? What I mean is it's pretty well known that compasses don't tend to work so good on Lake Superior. Why? Well, because there's so much iron all around Lake Superior that it tends to throw off compasses. And compasses don't really work too good. In fact, I believe that most ships use... oh gosh. It is a type of... Let's see. So I was trying to think. I was going to say gyroscope, but I didn't mean to say gyroscope. I don't know if they use things that are gyroscopic on there or not, but here's what I want to point out. Is that there's something called just basically compass variance. And any metal parts on a ship can cause compass variance, but the problem is in Lake Superior there's a huge amount of compass variance because of all the iron. So a lot of pilots there have to rely oftentimes more on charts or their knowledge of the seas and what points are what. They sail pretty much from point to point to point to point. Using oftentimes the land, they can frequently, because the shipping lanes on Superior and many of the other Great Lakes, you can oftentimes see land from them. So they don't absolutely have to use the compass. Anyways, said Duddleson and Feeger managed to bring the vessel into the wind and regain some control. They knew they were near shelter of Manitou Island, but in order to reach it, they would have to navigate the Waldo through a narrow passage between Gull Rock and the Keweenaw Peninsula. With all landmarks obscured by the blowing snow and water in their open pilot house, Duddleson, well, they don't have an open pilot house anymore. Now they just have an open. Now, how are they going to navigate? Because didn't it just say that the wave took the steering gear? It took the steering gear. I don't know how they're going to navigate without the steering gear. They would have to navigate the Waldo through a narrow passage between Gull Rock and the Keweenaw Peninsula, with all landmarks obscured by the blowing snow and water. And that's not a good time to sail on the lakes. I promise. Duddleson and Feeger could not possibly know they were a heartbreaking half-mile off course. A half-mile error, which can be caused by no visibility. And with your compass, your compass can tell you what? Direction. You can't go out onto those lakes without the visibility. A half-mile error that threw the Waldo hard aground Saturday night on a reef jutting out from Gull Rock. There the waves soon stripped the ship to bare hull, steel hull. Masts, stack, and cabins were washed into the roily rocks. The crew moved forward and huddled below decks in the windlass room. Soon after stranding, the ship broke in half. Yeah, broke in half, huh? They remained without food or heat in the dead hull of the Waldo until the ship's plight was sighted by the passing steamer George Stephenson and reported to life-saving crews at Eagle Harbor and Portage Lake. A lot of these stories, based on when they happen, because most of these wrecks are supposedly happen in November, December, and other winter months. Folks, the area around the lakes, and I mean all the lakes, but especially Superior, in the winter, I'm talking the land area around these lakes. Man, it is treacherous. It is cold. It will chill you to the bone. The air around here, in Michigan even, and I'm in lower Michigan, the air around here will chill you to the bone. Exposure. So I get so shocked when I read all these stories where they say, these crews stranded on the ship, no heat, no lights. Sometimes they say for a couple of days, and I think, nope. Because at some point during this harrowing event, I know that every man on that ship got wet. And if they ain't got a way to get dry, to get heated, and to get into dry clothes, they are screwed. So they say crews at the Eagle Harbor station left at midnight on Monday for the wreck after an unsuccessful attempt to launch their surf boat Monday morning. And some of the stories about these life-saving stations and some of the stuff they say that they did or would do, like that they had available to them to do, are really, really hard to believe, folks. And I can do another video with the stories about these life-saving stations and how believable some of it sounds or doesn't sound. The Portage Lake crew were picked up. Now, by the way, life-saving stations today do not use the same methods that they say that they used back at this time. This time when all these shipwrecks were happening. They say the Portage Lake crew were picked up by the tug, Charles Hebert, and their big motor lifeboat was towed to the scene of the disaster. Upon arriving, they found a desolate scene indeed. Coated with ice, you betcha. Coated with ice. Everything up there gets coated with ice. The Waldo resembled a ghost ship risen from the depths. Maneuvering alongside the Waldo's crew, who had been on board the wreck for 92 hours. People, 92 hours. How many hours are in a day? 24. So, that's almost 4 days. They say they were on this shipwreck in the water in the middle of one of the worst winter storms ever. Oh, they were okay. They had no heat, no lights. They were okay. Nah, they were fine. They all got naked and huddled together and they was okay. They jumped from their freighter's hull to the safety rescue boats. They were transported to Halton with very few ill effects. Are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? Very few ill effects. No, all their toes and fingers weren't frostbitten off. They had very few ill effects. Just pregnant pause for dramatic effect. Very few ill effects reported from their privations. Really. Heartbreak half mile continued, but unlike many of her sisters who came to grips with fate those 3 days in November, the Waldo did not die. Although declared a constructive total loss, the wreck was purchased by the Matthews Steamship Company of Toronto, salvaged, and rebuilt, and re-entered service in 1916 as the steamer Riverton. No. You guys bought a ship that they say was fucking broken half? Broken half. What'd you do? You towed the broken half ship from the Keweenaw Peninsula to where? And had it repaired. Now, this should tell us a little something. First, how valuable a big old lake freighter is. If another company was willing to buy it, and not just like wreck it for salvage, they were willing to buy it, go through the expense of getting it off the rocks and towing it, and that is some expense. Folks, when these guys, sometimes these pilots have kind of a boo-boo, and they end up putting their ships, you see, there's channels cut in all the lakes and all the rivers adjoining these lakes. There are channels cut that these ships sail through. They're not just natural. They had to cut channels in all of the rivers and passageways and in many of the lakes in the more shallow parts. Channels. And they did it in record time, of course. You guys should look into the rock cut and how and how fast they said that they did the rock cut, which is up in the St. Mary's River, and just how darn fast they said they built some of the Soo locks, which are just an amazing complex of locks, by the way. Yeah, they were something else back then, you know. Anyways, so sometimes a pilot will foul. He'll run his ship afoul in these channels, these tight turns, and he will get it stuck. And the expense of just getting those ships unstuck when they've run up onto the land on either side of the channel. So there's still water there. It's just not the deep channel. Those channels are cut for the ship's draft. Very, very expensive. You're telling me another company was willing to go out and get the broken ship and get it to some port and salvage it. And put it, not salvage, I'm sorry, put it back together. Use it again. Use it. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of expense. And we're to believe that these ship owners, these ship companies, were willing, it seems like is like a matter of course, to not only sacrifice lives of their men. And you know something? I don't care who you are. If you're willing to just willy-nilly sacrifice the lives of men who are sailing for you, somebody's family's going to come knocking on your door. I promise. But how about the value of the boat and the value of the cargo? Very high. And we're supposed to believe that over and over and over again, these shipping companies, they didn't care how bad the seas were. and that an average of 20 shipwrecks a year had been happening for a very, very long time. Oh no, you go sailing on those rough seas because we want we're going to take the risk just for the money of this one load of cargo. See, the stories never add up. They never make sense. Then they go on to say, after another brush with death, this time November 1942 on Georgian Bay rocks. So that would be off the Huron. There's a large kind of off area of Lake Huron, the Georgian Bay. The old Waldo was declared a total loss. So again, he said they renamed it Riverton. And then again, they're saying, now this happened. This is another thing you're going to find over and over with these ships, and it really makes you wonder, are they pulling some kind of fast one when they say this was salvaged over and over and over again, then renamed and renamed and renamed? It's all real convoluted and it's all real weird. They say the old Waldo was declared a total loss. However, she was salvaged, repaired, and returned to service. Total loss, but she was salvaged and repaired for the second time. For the second time. This time under the name Mohawk Deer. Gee, okay. Then she operated on the Great Lakes until 1966. 1966. In November 1967, while in tow to an Italian scrapyard, she struck some rocks near the village of Portofino, Italy, and slipped below the waves. Somebody decided she was valuable enough to tow her carcass all the way to Portofino, Italy. But since they didn't learn from the first two times she hit rocks, she did it again. Sunk below the waves. Now there's a tax write-off. She had cheated fate twice. The third time, there was no salvors to disturb the bones of the old Elsie Waldo. It's comedy. It's comedy. It's tragic comedy in a sense. Because if we're talking about, let's say, if we're talking about more verifiable wrecks, of course the tragedy is loss of life. I'll be the first to absolutely admit that. And I don't take loss of life in a joking or flippant way. I take being potentially, very, very potentially bullshitted. I take that very seriously. And if, say, let's just say this. Let's just say, a century or so ago, America and the nations and peoples that existed in America were taken over for about the last time. They had been taken over a couple times, likely by European powers. But a century or so ago, and I'm going to have to keep saying or so because we're at 2024 now, or so ago, they were taken over for the last time. In the course of these takeovers, and North America's very long and rich history, she did, for one thing, have a number of shipwrecks. If you're talking about wooden-hulled ships that are still kind of in shallow waters where they can still be viewed, there's a few different sites. Yeah, pleasure crafts. Because nobody can seriously think about doing like serious commercial sailing in wooden hulled, not just wooden hulled, because there's lots of beautiful wooden hulled steamers that were produced on the lakes in Great Lakes shipbuilding yards. Sailing ships is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, forget square sail, good grief, for those fucking useless. I'm talking about essentially your schooners, sloops, schooners, Triangular sails can catch wind up at 45-degree angle wind and use it. You're not going to be shipping too much because you're relying on the wind. But still, yeah, you might have some of those wooden hulled boats here and there, maybe in shallow waters, probably pleasure boats. Just like today, most of the sailing boats, they're for people's pleasure. People like to sail, they want to sail and go out and sail. Most of those, by the way, modern sailboats that people like to sail on just to sail, they got engines, backup engines, because you don't want to get dead in the water. How about when there's no wind blowing? You're dead in the water. That's not a good thing. But let's say 100, 150 years ago, for the last time, she was taken over by a different European power than maybe she was taken over before that. And there was a lot of loss. Not just at that time. Before then. A lot of loss after that. Maybe a lot of loss in this power that last took over North America. They had to break the backs of some of the nations that occupied some of the areas around the Great Lakes, because it's completely reasonable to think that different nations occupied different areas around the Great Lakes. It's a huge complex, by the way. All the Great Lakes combined, all of their great rivers leading into the Great Lakes, the rivers leading out to the St. Lawrence, out to the Erie Canal, the Calumet rivers to the and the Chicago River, which is it's just the canal leading to the Illinois River, to the Mississippi River. Other large rivers like the Missouri and the Ohio leading into the Mississippi and all of their channels out to New Orleans. Big stuff, big time stuff, lots of wealth. So maybe they had to take out a number of ships over a number of wars and battles. And that was just with European powers that took over the nations of North America a century or two ago. That's not to mention all of the wars that might have happened between those nations in the time. Because the thing is, if you don't believe that that's a possibility, you're going to have to believe that literally an average of 20 ships a year perished on the Great Lakes. That's just the average. So, of course, in some years, it would have been way, 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 way higher than that. Which is, it's mind-numbingly catastrophic and unacceptably stupid. You either have to believe that, or you can believe this theory that nations have lived and thrived and sailed in large lake boats, mostly steamers, up until about a century or so ago. We see a lot of changes, of course, in these things in the last century. The powers that secretly took North America over and are secretly running it to this day. Changing over, for instance, all of the trains, all of the lake shipping from their coal-fed steam engines to diesel, putting everybody on the diesel standard and stopping a lot of that water and rail shipping, which is far more economical per ton per mile, into over-the-road semis, which are far more expensive because they require far more fuel, diesel fuel, in fact. So I'm saying, look, you can either believe all the silly shipwreck stories, which I've got a ton of them, between all the books I've got, and they're all pretty silly. You can either believe that, and that happened for centuries up until 1975, and then barely a whisper since. Or you can believe that it's possible that something remarkably shady has happened. Not just in North America, but it would have to happen the world over. You can't just be like, well, what we're going to do is we'll just lie to and re-educate the people of North America, but we'll leave the rest of the world alone. Because, of course, the people in North America will never talk to anybody outside of North America. You can't do that. You can't do that. It has to be everywhere. And in that sense, it doesn't matter who you are, as far as racial or ethnic makeup or where you live, where you think you're from, where you are from. This whole thing, it's all about power. Power, world power, running the world, maintaining that power indefinitely. And the people who currently hold power, the invisible kings, they absolutely mean to hang on to that power indefinitely. And if that means lying to the whole world, well, okay. It's a necessary quote-unquote evil. So yeah, we might have to make up a few stories about Great Lakes shipping. We might have to make up a few more stories about Great Lakes military vessels built on the Great Lakes in World War I. Oh, hey, why were the French having a company in Minnesota build a lot of their ships for the war towards the end of the war? And unfortunately, a lot of them sank in the Great Lakes. Well, it was just, maybe it was a little bit more economical. You get a lot of crazy stories about these Great Lakes and the histories of sailing on the Great Lakes. Crazy, crazy stories. Crazy stories. This is just an example of one. And since I've been in the middle of so many other pursuits that have been taking up so much of my time, intellectual pursuits and, slave job pursuits, I'm not sure if I might just actually do some more briefs about these Great Lakes shipwrecks and crazy stories that they have, official stories that they have for us about the Great Lakes. But if you would like to see me be able to continue this exercise in thinking about our history and our world and people therein, and of course the Bible, come visit my Patreon. The link's always in the description. I always put it in there. Sign up for one of my tiers, and you get stuff. You get stuff. It's symbiotic. So with that being said, thank you for joining me, and I will see you again when I can see you again.